Man, you already know. I'm a little sad for the Fijians, but before I get started, up the boys in Wales, man. They showed up, they showed out. Let's get into it.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits, yeah. Gotta keep on moving no matter how hard.
Here comes Danny Tusizawa, back to Baker, Baker with the fin. Kurt Baker in for DC, and this may well do it old glory with the try. The New Zealand Sevens legend, Kurt Baker with the cherry on top.
Can you believe it?
All right. Welcome back to the On the Line Rugby podcast, a show brought to you by the Believe Sports Network. I'm your host, Micah Nagaishi, and welcome back. It's a weird day. Ancestry-wise, we ballin' because my Uncle Dewey up there and the rest of the boys in Cardiff must be still jamming. I'm a little frustrated though. The Fiji versus Wales game did not go the way I predicted. Did they get robbed? I want to say they did. I think Matt Carley had a very mixed approach to how he went about penalizing certain things. I definitely think that they lost a couple tries towards the end that could have happened if it wasn't for penalties. But, obviously the Fijians didn't exactly help themselves out, but they deserved it every step of the way. That game was taken away by officiating. Being that as it may, though, I can't overlook the Welsh team showing up and showing out under pressure in France. A lot of people obviously shared my opinion that the Fijians were just going to boat race them. But, they came in with a new game plan. I really thought that they opened up the playbook. They showed up a lot in terms of where they could be as a future franchise, even with their oldies playing. And to go into that, man, did George North and Dan Biggar, man, they were a menace out there. And I have to give them the co-MVP for this match. I think for Fiji, the man in the match was Semi Radradra. It's not surprising. That guy is an absolute freak. Every time he touches the ball, magic happens. But, man, Dan Biggar looked like a different player out there. In the few times that I've watched Fiji in all their competitions facing bigger opponents like this, they never faced a guy like Dan Biggar at this level any point in his career. And I've watched Wales throughout their last World Cup, a little bit of Six Nations here and there in 2018. They weren't exactly on my radar moving in, and I figured the scandals were just going to keep carrying them forward. But man, did he show off George Ford levels of IQ. For all of you guys who do watch YouTube, I suggest you check out Squidge Rugby if you haven't already. His takes on a lot of things and his analysis is what really got me moving into film study and keeping my IQ up just for even on my on-field performances. And man, that whole team with Warren Gatland looked reminiscent of that English team. Dan Biggar and George North were almost that double pivot between Ford and Farrell. Obviously now with England, it's Marcus Smith and Owen Farrell. But as a whole, the presence is the same. You have your George North who will barrel it forward. He's the downhill runner. He can play that second pivot spot, but he can distribute. Dan Biggar was marshaling the boys and was absolutely on point when it comes to tackling, getting turnovers. He was great on and off the ball. But he set up, I think his biggest things that he did was set up game management and his ability to marshal the team offensively. For example, I think the biggest thing that he did in terms of scaring the defense was the try that he had in the 29th minute on Fiji. Don't get me wrong. Could Fiji have probably read this a little better? Yes. Could it have been blown up, though? I don't know. I think there was multiple options in there that could have had him either Biggar or someone off of Biggar scoring in the corner versus having George North score. But, obviously that's hindsight 2020. But if we take a look at the play, I suggest you guys watch the highlights or go back if you can, watch a pirated stream, watch the replay on Peacock if y'all can afford that. That's outrageously priced, but oh wells. But if you look at the play at the 29th minute, they're about at the 5-meter line out, pushing in. You have the pod of, I believe it was George North on the outside. You had Dan Bigger in the back, and I'm not sure who the first receiver was. I would have to go back and watch the film, but first receiver takes the ball. You have Dan Bigger taking a Sexton level loop out the back to kind of present himself as a third option, almost as a boss. And then you have George North running this amazing blocking crash towards the first receiver to either take the space inside or create that blocker that will then submit it out to Bigger and out to the wing, which had a lot of openings. And that obviously could have went anyway. But I think the biggest mess up on Fiji from that set was having Kwiki Daveta, the loose forward for the Fijians, and Semi Radradra focus in on the first receiver. Now, what Radradra could have done is he should have marked George North, who by all means sold that line, but they both marked up on the first receiver, hit the first receiver. First receiver then passes it in beautiful hospital fashion, out to North, who takes it down the lane, and there's no one there. 13 was doing a great job managing Dan Bigger out the back. But yeah, like I said, it could have gone either way, outside or in. That ball probably wouldn't have been denied regardless, but I think they could have blew it up if they had the chance. But obviously, again, hindsight 2020, parallel universes, who knows really what happened. But it just goes to show that Wales as a whole under Warren Gatland has redefined what it means to play in that team. They definitely evolved from last World Cup. When it comes down to it, their play style was a lot more ground and pound in the trenches, almost kind of the North version of South Africa. I liked watching them for that reason. Just downhill running, set piece base, ground and pound the ball, really slow, feed the ball out wide when needed. Kicking game was immaculate. But yes, they took a couple things from that game plan that they had in the last World Cup, but they looked almost night and day different. As I said before, they're almost reminiscent of England's 2019 run at the World Cup. Their management of space was a lot better. They played a lot more open field play, and they definitely cycled through kind of what having George Ford or Owen Farrell at 10 did for England at the time. They would cycle effortlessly through that 9-10 ratio of like who's taking what. Ben Youngs would take the point at some points for that team. Sometimes it would be Ford, or sometimes Ford would just be marshalling the offense, and it would just be out of Ben Youngs distributing. And that's the same thing with Wales. They had Thomas Williams absolutely running the show, obviously distributing the ball perfectly, but you had Dan Bigger, who didn't always need to get fed the ball. Obviously, he did step in when he needed, and when he touched the ball, magic happened. But, it came down to a lot of that cycling. So, they never really need to play off a 10 or off a 9 totally. And I think that made a big difference. Their open play was a great big thing. With Josh Adams taking a wide open skip pass score from Bigger in the early moments to take that score up was huge. That set the tone for that match. And then having Bigger on the field with that cross kick to Louis Rees-Zammit, that set up a lot of things. I can't say it enough, man. Dan Bigger might be one of my sleeper 10s for this competition. I wasn't expecting this out of the Welsh team. They're insane. I definitely think that they have a shot to get back to the quarterfinals. I would love to see them rematching in South Africa. That would be great, but we'll see what happens. In terms of Fiji, towards the late end of the game, while they did drive a lot of that off the back of Semi Radradra, just imbuing that Greg Jennings, put the team on his back, broken leg, it don't matter, roll out there, feed him the ball, let magic happen. I think he did great, but man, no matter what they scored, they were lackadaisical. Every time they scored a try or took a penalty back, they were just walking back. Time is ticking. Time is valuable. It doesn't matter if you're the All Blacks or if you're Team USA. No matter how good or how bad you are, you always have to manage your time effectively, especially when you're behind. No matter what sport you're into, that would have been their equivalent of a 2-minute drill, and they failed that 2-minute drill. With 7 minutes left on the clock, they were walking back. They were, dancing around the kickoff. They let Wales do the same. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate Wales trying to just, get it over with. But Fiji, you got to do a better job of just managing your time. That's seconds off of what you could be doing in the open field, seconds off of what you could get a valuable penalty to get yourself over the line in spite of the referees officiating. Do something, man. Come on. And on top of that, yes, you got the bonus point in your loss, but now what? Now you're going to have to win out the rest of your pool stage. You're going to have to get some decisive wins. I'm sure they'll do it, but now they're put on upset notice. Every team's going to look at them and be like, okay, we can do this. We can't let them slip up. They have to play almost effortlessly to get out of that. And I'm personally a little worried for them. I hope they follow my hopes of them making that quarterfinal, semifinal appearance, but I think that definitely has to be looked into moving forward. Another thing that really broke my mind was the way Australia played. I mean, wow. I was expecting them to get maybe a close win versus the Georgians. Their scrum be tested, and it'd be just a ground and pound game that hopefully the Georgians would dominate. But Australia, another team, proved me wrong again. I think what was really surprising was just 3 takeaways. That Jordan Pataya was essentially that second pivot in that game, and wow, was he something. I really expected Samu Kerevi to step up in that role, but I think he embraced his downhill running, defending, playing 12, standard 12 kind of play style really effectively. I think they used him in really well in the way that he played. In the highlights that I watched, Jordan Pataya showed up on, just like Ben Donaldson, on every play. We'll get into Donaldson a little later, but man, with his power and his ability to just pass the ball through, offload it, he set up kicks himself. That guy is something special, and the Reds really have a great 13 at that spot. As for Donaldson, obviously, it's his first time starting in the 15 jersey in the World Cup. Throw him into the Wolves, biggest stage. He misses his first kick. How will he respond? And I think he responded really well. He almost got a hat trick in the match. And I think the things that he did really well, obviously, was his field vision, his ability to not only manage the space, but see gaps. In his first try, he got off of Carter Gordon. He saw the space effectively well. Huge gap in between the Georgian defense. They were marking up Jordan Pataya instead of him, and they were running together. And, Carter Gordon could have picked one of 2 options, and he picked the right one. Donaldson slots it in beautifully. His kicking and game management off the back when the Georgians tried to pin them deep, especially in Australia's own end zone, wow. That was astonishing for me, watching the Waratahs in fantasy and playing them with them in fantasy, especially. Donaldson was great off the boot, but he was a runner of the ball. While I did see that, man, did his management of the game improve, and especially in your first test in the biggest stage, I got to give credit where credit's due, and the combination to get Carter Gordon back to that, like I said, let him run, let him not manage the game, but play the space. Donaldson was the main point man for kicks. And every time he would sniff the ball, Carter Gordon could be in trouble. He didn't have to be, but he knew as a second pivot where he needed to be, constantly put himself in contention to get the ball. And wow, man, that combo could be pretty scary moving forward in the rest of their pool stages. I'd be excited to watch Australia myself moving forward. They just have a great combo. But, I think the biggest takeaway from that whole spiel would be the Waratahs, for you Super Rugby fans, have a team for the future. I have yet to see Max Jorgensen play. I hope he gets sets the field, but man, outside of Parecki on defense, which hopefully he will improve that moving forward, having Ben Donaldson in there, really shows up on paper. I think he'll take this a lot of his experiences off of this play with Mark Nawani Tawase and the boys, back to the Super Rugby franchise that he loves, and they'll go off. I really think that my old coach will have that team, Darren Coleman, he will have that team rolling, and I hope they have a run for Super Rugby in Australia. The Reds will obviously be in contention. The Brumbies will always be in contention, but I always hope that my Waratahs will have a chance, and I think this is probably their biggest statement, at least for provincials. Another thing two things other than that I really found that were probably secondary to my experience in that game was, this is Tate McDermott's side, no matter who's on the captaincy sheet. I think that they just put Will Skelton in there because he brings in a different, more physical mindset that I think the Australians desperately needed. Yes, they can survive on that traditional Aussie flair with the flat ball, quick play style, but they need that enforcer. They need that tone setter in the middle of the field. And Will Skelton, by all intents and purposes, is that international Eben Etzebeth level, I'm going to run the ball in your face. I'm going to pound the rock. I'm going to get in your face whenever you have, give me an inch of doubt in your mind. And I'm going to just ruin your emotions and your game plan for that day. And I think Australia needs it. And especially with amazing talents like Angus Bell and developing guys like Tom Hooper, they're going to need that leadership in the forward pack. And I think that's why they selected him as captain. But, I think no matter what is on paper, Tate McDermott runs this team. Whenever the ball's in his hands and he's distributing it, I really think that no matter if it was Donaldson in there or not, he would be the one calling for the ball, not Carter Gordon. He's the one always sniffing out gaps. He's the point defense runner, the tone setter for that back line. He's the guy that brings that leadership in. And I think it serves Australia well to have two different captains, one distributing and one just being the tone setter for that team. They will do hopefully well, especially with the scrum. I mean, wow. Australia, wiped the floor with the Georgians, and I wasn't expecting that. I don't watch Georgia rugby play, but when they do play, South Africa, or they play, in this case, Australia, I'll watch, and wow, they put out their team, which for all intents and purposes is an okay forward pack, but wow, they push them around. The Georgians are, arguably in the top 3, if not 2, with the South Africans for their ability to scrummage the ball and play in the trenches, and they moved them off the ball. That was impressive. I think that was my biggest question between him and Carter Gordon and how they would use them, but they put out and they showed out, and I'm impressed. Up the boys in New South Wales. I can't wait to see you guys when the Lions test comes, and hopefully you guys carry the success from the World Cup moving forward and into obviously next year with the Lions series. As for the other game I watched, really was South Africa versus Scotland. I definitely thought that game was a lot slower than I thought. Everyone's going to talk about the Jesse Creel hit that should have been carded. I think that, a lot of pundits have been saying, takes away from South Africa's credibility that the refs won or lose in the game. I think they kind of blow him out of proportions a little bit, but yes, I think that rightfully so, that should have been a carded hit. Whether or not you agree with me or not is not my problem. That's just the way of the laws, and South Africa did take advantage. But I think when it comes down to brass tacks and who really lost Scotland the game, it wasn't that hit. It wasn't officiating. It was Finn Russell. I love the guy, plays for Racing 92 now. Still, everyone says, if he played in New Zealand or if he played in South Africa, he would be that Dan Carter best 10 in the world role. His ability to just be a 10, be a running 10 is out of this world. And man, can that guy make plays, no matter if it's off the boot or with his hands. But I think his just look for that home run, almost Chicago Hounds and the MLR vibe of just get me a highlight, move forward. I want this big nasty hit. Give me this turnover. It hurt them, and he gave the game away single-handedly, in my personal opinion, for the South Africans to take advantage. I I think Peter Steph Dutoy was the MVP that game. He did the former World Player of the Year. Of course, he's going to play well, but he did everything right for the South Africans. He pounded the ball great with exceptional force. He slipped a couple tackles. He made every hit. He shot up and made plays. It looked reminiscent of his play versus England, just shutting down lanes. He was the tone setter for that defense. And on offense, he just did everything right. It's hard not to give him the crown for that. But I think the biggest takeaway was Grant Williams deserves a start. I would argue, hell, outside of the pool stages if they make it past it. Because, man, everyone knows Grant Williams for his speed and him in the South African Sharks jersey. But, man, did he show it out. I've only really known him actually this year. That's a discredit to me not watching the URC. But man, off of the pick and goes I saw in the Rugby Championship, I thought he was it. Outside of, he did kind of, leave a little room for Faf de Klerk on the defensive end, but he left some massive hits. But when he came off the bench, that presence was known. He could take it off, and he did. Man, nobody could catch him. He must have had like a 50-yard gain on one of his line breaks, and he can fly, and that's not even counting his improved defensive work. He's looking like the future of that jersey. Move away Herschel Yankees, move away Cobus Reinach. He could be that guy moving forward, and I hope to see him at future World Cups and in the Rugby Championship show out the way he did. Because, man, his career got cut short in the Rugby Championship, because that nasty hit he took against Argentina. But wow, like he needs to be on the field more. This guy is amazing. No knock on Faf de Klerk. He played like out of his mind. But man, you gotta give the boy some minutes and let him see what he can do. I think another big thing for my domestic audience, for those who haven't watched the World Cup, all my Old Glory fans, rejoice. You had another re-signing, and I think this one could be a gangbuster re-sign. You brought in Jason Robertson back to the team, coming back from the Bay of Plenty. I personally, despite watching the MLR every year, haven't watched Old Glory, so I didn't really know who he was moving into this year. But, man, watching his highlights off of Bay of Plenty, wow. Like he brings a lot to the table that I think Old Glory can use either in that double pivot mode or just him slotting into 10. He can absolutely run around, make plays. I think the three biggest things that he brings is elusiveness. He can get skinny. He'll find a gap and run around. He's constantly always around the ball. He makes a lot of plays off of that, whether it's on defense, pounding textbook tackles. He'll get low. He likes to dive at ankles, make taps. He wraps up well. He stops a lot of tries. I got to admit, for a defensive guy who's not the greatest at his tackling, he gives a great textbook way to avoid getting trucked and going a little higher than the normal. He goes a little lower below the knees, and he makes it happen. He sniffs out balls very well. Pause, but whether it's turnovers or finding the space, he runs it very well, and his kicking is automatic within reach. I haven't seen him. Obviously, those highlights I think were from 3 years ago. They didn't exactly show a lot of the longer kicks that he could do, but from the shorter, I think it was under 40 meters was the range for a lot of those highlight tapes. Like he can slot it in pretty easy. I could see him taking the starting 10 away. I hope he does, but regardless if they use him as a double pivot, he's played in the Bay of Plenty as a center and a fullback. He'll make plays. That guy is wow. You guys scored a good one. I can't wait to watch this season for Old Glory. I definitely have them now. With that signing, I'm going to have to redo my MLR report card. I was just going to draft after this recording, but they could be that team to beat in the East. I think that second team now. Like, I don't think there's no question about it. Like, wow. I'm excited for them. But can't wait for the rest of the MLR. I'll be doing my preview with hopefully lineups if they come out on time. Please come out on time on Friday. Hope you guys will join me there. Peace out, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.